Welcome back to Intuition, Your First Sense. This is an episode that's going to be fun. We don't know where it's going, which is kind of fun when you combine two intuitives in one room and they don't know where things are going. Well, two different rooms. I am having back on the show my daughter Kaela, who many people have responded to an episode we did earlier and said that they really enjoyed the dialogue, the subject matter, and our relationship and how we listen to each other and banter back and forth, but also correct when it's not right, which is good. That honesty is important in relationships. And I've had a lot of questions recently from parents with their kids dealing with spirit activity and communication with those who have crossed and just picking up on all that stuff. And I thought, well, I'm going to go to my resident expert as my child, but no longer a child, and see if she can help us, because I know what to say from I've been in it so long that it's normal for me perspective, but sometimes I forget what it's like to just be discovering this. And Kayla's got a really good memory, sometimes photographic at time, which I'll admit is challenging, but I appreciate it because I feel like it will help. So thank you for agreeing to do this again and entering. You're welcome. It's been Kayla's practice to kind of remain in the background of Vicky Bear's life. So I'm very grateful that you'd be willing to do this, because truthfully, I don't think most kids grow up in a household like ours was, or like yours was, ours was. I'm not sure how to say that I think I did grow up along with you, but and that honesty and transparency and, hey, it's your ghost, you deal with it, talk could be helpful. So that's what we're talking about today. So can you give me, because people might think we had these conversations all along, but we haven't. So that's what's kind of fun for me too, is that we talked about it, I think, as a matter of course of action, but not necessarily, hey, this is wiring or whatever. So, which makes me realize I was completely remiss as a parent, but that's okay. Can you explain or just give a little bit of background of what is your experience with spirit activity, those who have crossed? I don't really call them ghosts unless they're stuck between the realms, but can you give us a little bit on what your experience has been?
I mean, there's a lot. I consider it like hearing them, because I hear them as if they're in the room, like you and I are talking. Since as long as I can remember, but I didn't start really paying attention to it until you started going into that kind of business, because it was just, I don't know, there were people in the room. And I remember you used to tell me that I would do both sides of the conversation when I was like playing make-believe and stuff. So I don't know if that was me picking up on stuff and just vocalizing it, or how much of that was imagination. But yeah, I've been hearing people all my life. So I don't know. I think it would depend on what you mean by like experiences, because I have both negative and positive things that I could say about it. So it just kind of depends.
Okay. So yes. And for those with a little background information, Kaela started talking at 8 months old. So that dialogue went on for quite a while. And I'll be honest, it was actually your father who pointed all this out to me, because he would say that my mother, your Nana, was checking on you, tucking you in, and I'm like, oh, knock it off. That's just not true. That stuff doesn't happen. And then the more I realized, oh boy, this stuff does happen, and I've been communicating with them my whole life too, I realized, oh my goodness, we have a lot of antennas in this house, and I don't know how I'm gonna manage that. But yeah, there was never a question of, when I look back on it, I don't feel like I ever questioned, how they'll say that a kid has an imaginary friend. Like, I never thought of it as your creativity. I always thought
whole like families, so many of them.
and that may be why I just, on some level, before I even wanted to look at this and admit that this was going on, I just didn't question it because you were so insistent. If I tried to correct something, or just remembered something wrong, you were like, that is not what I said. And I'm like, okie dokie. Which, for those listening, that's an important thing to realize when you're working with kids and they're telling you that they saw someone in the other room. We have to believe them. But it's a good way to tell if you have a storyteller or if you have someone who's really seeing those energies and interacting with them. If they give you some detail, like that guy wore a red shirt and you change the story for them. Say, remember when that guy wore the blue shirt? If you have a kid who's really seeing spirit, they will be annoyed that you corrected what they saw because it's such a knowing within one. Or heard, if they heard a voice and you said, that woman, and they're like, it wasn't a woman, it was a man, it was a child. I'm not saying like test your kid, but I have worked with young ones who were just trying to get away with something and they realized their parents were excited by the fact that they might be seeing spirit activity. So they embellished just a smidge. But I don't, you were such a matter-of-fact kid. Like, even if I knew to do that, I don't know that I would have because you were so emphatic when we got something wrong. So do you remember when we moved into the house in Pittsfield? Because I have a very clear memory, and you were a little older at this point, but I have a very clear memory of when I went, oh, shoot, we are dealing with a lot more than I realized we were dealing with. But you don't remember that? So when we...
I do remember one thing that I could tell you after you're done with this, though. That was probably a year or two later. So I'll tell you that after.
Okay, now this was a couple months after we moved in because I remember still trying to get settled and where's everything and doing all that house remodeling.
So I was like 11-ish.
Yeah. So... you came in the house and you asked me, are people supposed to be able to walk through cars?
I do remember that. I do.
And I looked at you and I remember looking at your father going, okay, I guess we're having that conversation. And I said, well, no, people can't, but spirits absolutely can. And I think for me, what it was, besides the fact that I felt like I had to protect you, I then had to admit that had been going on for me. And then I just rerouted them so they didn't run through the house. They ran outside the house. They were trying to go to work at the mill across the street. So, but I remember that so vividly because I remember thinking, oh boy, I better learn some of this stuff because I think there's more going on. Because Sean, Kaela's older brother, one of them, had always talked about energies in the house we lived in Lee, and the nice man who lived up in the attic with him. And because I remember when we were moving, he asked if we could bring him, and I'm like, no, he has to stay here because I'm not adding to all of that. So yes, people, our house had some fun to it. So what's your memory?
So I do remember that one. I actually saw that one from across the park. And I was swinging on the swings, but I was really high because I don't see them. I can see them sometimes, but I don't see them like people, like actual 3D physical beings. I don't know how to describe how I see them, but they're not.
Is it like holographic?
Kind of. I would say like fuzzy face. Like
okay.
They have. There's a movie I can show you after we're done with this that is exactly how it is, but it's not. It's not clear, but you could tell that it was a person. It's like a silhouette. Kind of like, those shows that, like A Haunting in Georgia, A Haunting in Connecticut on like TV, how they never actually show a being. It's always like a weird silhouette, but you can make out that it's a person. It's similar to that. Not as scary, though. They definitely embellish it.
Yeah, they do. They do.
But anyway, my memory. A couple years later, probably about 14, I was in my room. It was just after Christmas, around this time. And I was supposed to be cleaning my room all of the many times I never actually was. And I had put a stack of game boards on top of the hamper that Dad had just made me. It was right after I brought it upstairs. And I had the karaoke machine that I also got that year plugged in, and I was listening to music through it. And then the music had stopped, but it was still like working, I don't know. And I heard as clear as day this man's voice. Wasn't Dad's voice. Speaking of, remind me of Dad and Tank.
Okay.
Wasn't Dad's voice, wasn't any voice I had ever heard before, but it said, clear as day, get the games off the hamper. And I'm like, okay. Noted, scary voice. But that was the first time I had ever, like, distinctly heard them, because usually it's, like, in passing, at, like, almost as if someone's walking by me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, what? But I heard that one clear as day, and it was so, I wouldn't say scary, but just, like, alarming, because I was home alone. It always happens when I'm home alone, and maybe that's just because my guard's down or something, because there's no one around me. But it's always when I'm home alone. It was loud, too. I'm like, all right. I won't mess with you.
So the thing that I find fascinating is how I believe everybody can have connection with those in spirit, but there are certain antennas, those of us with antennas, that just have an easier time communicating, and that's through wiring. It is considered to be through genetics. There are many studies that show that this trait is genetic, so that along with your lactose problem, you're welcome. But it's always fascinating to me how we all have different abilities. Like, to be able to hear them is my last one. I still have a really hard time with that. And granted, I shut it down a lot lately because of the other work that I'm doing. But I feel like when you can hear that, it can be, it's called clairaudient, but it can be difficult in discerning, did I think that? Is it somebody walking by on the sidewalk outside? In that case of the hamper, it directly correlates to something going on in your room. So it's a little bit easier to define that, okay, that's where that came from. But it can be, I've met and worked with so many people where I'm like, you can really hear it, can't you? Because sometimes it comes in your own voice too. So it's difficult, but usually the messages from those who have crossed their spirit guides, angels, just drops in. Like, there's no thinking ahead of time.
Yeah.
And it can be disconcerting, especially when you're home alone and then you think somebody's in the house too.
Yeah, that's happened so many times. And it's also not so, on a different note of being, like, people being in the house, but also, like, mental health issues.
Yeah.
So many people have auditory hallucinations, and, like, myself, I have, bipolar disorder, and you can hallucinate with that. I have had hallucinations sometimes. It's usually when I'm very, very tired. But it's hard to discern, like, am I hearing things because of chemical stuff going on upstairs, or am I hearing things? Mm-hmm. So that can be confusing too.
Yeah. I remember Sean had said to me one time, he was 13 or 14, and he told me he was hearing voices. And of course, you have to consider the fact that there's chemical or wiring, and have that, or both. True. But you have to consider that, because as a parent, I think you have to consider that. Just because we had an open forum for energies popping in and out doesn't mean that you don't take care of the human. And I remember saying to him, and this just came so intuitively to me, that I remember asking him, okay, but what are the voices asking you to do? Are they telling you to do something? Are they asking you to do something? Because those who have crossed in communication will never send a harmful or negative message. So it will, it can be bossy, move that, get there, take that left. Like, I didn't listen that one time we were in a car accident, and I was supposed to take a left and I didn't listen, and then we got rear-ended. So they can be bossy and in that regard, but they will never send through a message of harm someone, harm yourself, or any. So then you can have some kind of delineation between, okay, I need to seek a mental health professional. And I have sent people who have come to me saying that they hear spirit, and once I read them, I'm like, perhaps, but I can't work with you until you work with a psychiatrist for at least a year. Because, that's a double whammy to have both. But it's a good point that you bring up, that there have been many lifetimes where we've been persecuted. And even in this lifetime, I've had not a lot of experiences, but some, where people just thought I was kookabonkers, and I'm okay with that. But being able to not, part of the reason I wanted to do this show was so that there's some tools, whether it's a teenager listening to this or the parents or grandparent or someone who can say, you can ask the questions. Okay, what are they saying? How do you receive it? It is often when we're alone because you don't have the interference of other people's frequencies. Like I remember there was one time I was in my room and you were in your room and you were complaining about this guy energy that was in your room. And
looked in my closet.
Well, that was more the attic, but yeah.
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 It was up on that top shelf.
Yeah.
There was like, the
I know.
floor was open or something.
Yeah,
so
I know.
To me, it felt like my closet, but attic closet. I think it was the same hamper guy. He lived in my closet.
Yeah, it took me.
I had my headboard up against the closet for a while. Mm-hmm. It wasn't around that time. I was on the opposite side of the room. I moved around that room so many times.
Yeah, I remember. Also genetic. But yeah.
Yes, he did. He lived in my closet / attic area. Yeah. I do remember.
Yeah, it took me a while to get rid of him. But I remember you saying, I was reading, and I remember you saying, Mom, come get rid of this. And I said, no, it's your room, your ghost. I mean, I was working on it. It's not like I was like ignoring it completely. You have to know how to do this so that when you move out and I'm not around, that you can handle these energies. And eventually it was you that released them, whether you really realize it or not. So that's important for people to, and parents especially, to get curious, to ask, but also to hold a little bit of a line. If you're not able to see or feel or hear, or you're not ready to, and your kid is experiencing this, like listening is the first step, and then contact somebody that can help you understand it. I just worked with someone the other day whose kids have very visceral, like they can feel the touching of their self. I hate that part. I will admit I'm good with the rest of it.
I've only had that once.
Do not like being touched. And so I gave her some tools, like of, asking for white light or even demanding that they leave. Do you think there's anything comforting about it?
Yes and no. I kind of struggle with the comfort part. Just because it's, I wouldn't say jarring, but it's just strange that someone, if you will, can be so close, but yet so far, as I like to say. Mm-hmm. And that's hard for me to kind of process sometimes, is that they're there, but they're not there. So I wouldn't really say it's comforting, but it doesn't make me uncomfortable either. I just kind of, I'm in limbo when it comes to how I feel. But I also wouldn't say that I don't know what word to use, that I don't like it. Mm-hmm. There's a specific word I'm looking for, but I can't think of what it is. I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about it.
Okay. Because I remember when I was figuring this out and realizing through a friend who passed, who kept popping into other readings I was doing, and then I realized, oh.
Was that Anne?
Yeah.
You gave me her pamphlet the other day.
I gave you her pamphlet?
From her, memorial service, you gave me her pamphlet. It's weird that we're talking about her right now.
Yeah. So in a dream or something? Or
no, literally, it's in the box of stuff you gave me.
Oh, it is the stuff I dropped off.
Yeah, it's in that box.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, you gave me a bunch of random stuff, and I was like, okay, I don't know why you gave me that, but that's funny that
that's not conscious. Or it wasn't intended, but yeah, she liked you. So,
well, if you want it back, I have it.
No, it's okay. It's okay. But until I started seeing her pop up in sessions I was doing with people, I didn't even really have this concept of mediumship. So it was through her popping in, realizing, something's changing, because it was comforting for me to see her, to know she was okay. But then she actually popped into a session I was doing with someone, and I realized, oh shoot, she might know this person. just because she was so present. And when I said that to the woman I was reading for, they had worked together in a previous job, other than where I knew Anne from. And that's where like everything started clicking. And I know for me, even though it was still very disconcerting to see them in the grocery store, it's still disconcerting for me to see them in the grocery store and stuff. It gave me a sense of peace because, I mean, the way I was raised, you didn't talk about anything. So it made me feel like, okay, there is a continuity somewhere, even if my human head can still not grasp it. I have so many questions when I croak. For whoever greets me. For whomever greets me, I'm going to be like, okay, yeah, I know, but I got to ask questions first because I did this my whole adult life. I deserve some answers. I tried to get your father to do. I told him before he passed, I'm like, okay, you're a direct link when you understand what it was like because he was there while I was trying to figure all this out. I said, you give me answers. Well, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So the ability is something that, again, I think is wired within us. But that doesn't mean that when you have this, that you have to hang a shingle out or you even have to be of service to anything. It's actually our own soul's growth that we're, connecting in with this. Just like, for so many years I did this publicly on stage and everything and then decided, I think I'm complete. I think I'm complete with it. They still crack me up. I still find those on the other side to be hysterical. But because you leave your ego here when you cross, they're a lot of fun to me. So what is it that's not pleasant for you?
Hearing my dead father. Not the most pleasant, I have to be honest. And that's where like that weirdness of like being there but not being there, it kind of screws with me. It screws with my head. So yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah. And that's
actually where I started to be not, because I said earlier it didn't make me uncomfortable, but just where I kind of hold myself back because I'm like, no, we're not there yet. Go away.
Yeah. Well, it evokes emotion, and
right.
This happens with everyone. So even if you're listening and you're not having a clear sense of seeing a loved one or feeling or hearing a loved one, you still are on some level. So if you get that sudden memory and it flies through you, like you're doing dishes or something, and you just get this overwhelming sense, it is that emotion. It evokes it. It brings it out, and it can... yeah. It can reactivate the grief. I remember saying to him shortly after he passed, probably about 5 or 6 months, that you have to back the hell up. Like, I'm human. I love that you're here, but you have to back up because I have to grieve as a human. You have to not visit for a while. You have to not be, because people are like, you're so blessed, you're so lucky. I am. And there are definitive challenges and even heartaches that are a result of being able to have this high sensory perception. There are. So it's both comforting, affirming, and annoying. It's just freaking annoying sometimes.
Absolutely.
So, or like, when one of you is hurting or mad because he's passed, I'm like, I'm still stuck in that space. Not stuck isn't the right word, but I'm still in that space of, okay, but this is so great, and this really sucks. Like, thanks a lot, Howard. So the process of, I'm curious, and I waited to ask this question because I wanted to do it on air. You work in healthcare. No, it's not going to be a hard one. You work in healthcare.
Yes,
and have been like frontline ED department, trauma, all that kind of stuff. Well, first of all, I'm so grateful, and I'm also like, why the hell with your wiring would you do that? But I get it.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen them at work? Or heard them, I should say, rather than see.
Not that I can recall. It's very hectic in an emergency room, both energy-wise and people-wise, no matter how small of a hospital you have. And I also worked at a hospital where we had primarily psych patients and people struggling with addiction. So it was all very chaotic all the time. So I don't know if I was picking up on them. It would be really hard for me to differentiate what I was picking up on and what was just around me. I did pick up a lot on code blues when we would have those. For anybody that doesn't know what a code blue is, it's when somebody comes in cardiac arrest or is passing, unfortunately. Not always, but most of the time, yes. And I would know ahead of time that they were going, because it's almost like, oh, this is dark, I'm sorry, but when the EMS would be like bringing them into the code room and stuff, and it's a horrific sight. I'm not gonna kid you, but like I almost see them all like, hey, I'm out. And like it's hard because I can empathize with the family, and I know they're coming in, and like there's a line you have to be professional.
Sure.
Whereas I want to give them a hug and be like, oh, I'm sorry. I know exactly how that feels, but you can't. But at the same time, I'm like, good for you. You're out. So I don't know. I can't say that I have hurt them definitively, but I do have some experiences there. And it's been both hard and not just like, hey, good for you too. There's been some times where I didn't want them to go because they were young, where that's been hard. That one, those kind of cases really have messed with me. But usually when they're like older and stuff and it's just their time, I'm like, go Nana. have a nice trip. So I don't know. I do have those kind of experiences, and that's the kind of thing that also kind of wears on me, though. And I think that's more so the empathy too, not just being sensitive, like spiritually, is also like death and dying can suck. It's great because you finished your contract, as you like to say, but it's so sad for the people who are left behind. So that's probably one thing that really like sucked the life out of me.
it can, and highly empathic people, I think everybody has a level of empathy. Some people just aren't connecting with it. It can absolutely be taxing and draining, and that's why it's so important to have your clearing space, or your practices, your showers with the salt, or asking for Archangel Michael to clear things, or just stomping your feet, or just wishing them well, because it can be it can mess with the head to be and even from my perspective, I always say high five to those who have crossed, even to those family members, and I'm gonna say, and a big hug to you, because like you said, you understand what it feels like to have somebody feel like your heart's being ripped out because somebody's crossed. But you also realize that if we're honoring all souls, we're honoring the ones who have crossed. The suicide being the only loophole. Other than suicide, we pass when our contract is complete. And I will admit, I'm having a hard time actually right now with the COVID stuff, because I so know this is true, that we cross when our contract is complete. And yet all these people are crossing from stuff that we could have prevented. So that's one of the questions when I cross. It's going to be the top of my list, because I feel like we still have to honor that. But there's a sadness that's going on universally, because this is happening across the world. It's not just happening in the United States. And what I also wanted people to understand is that empathic nature of all of ours, with this many souls crossing all the time, it affects our mental health, and because it affects our emotional space, and it affects our so our mental health is affected because our emotional body is affected, and our emotional body is affected because our etheric bodies are affected, and our etheric bodies are affected because all these people who are leaving their physical bodies to be in their etheric bodies. So we can think we're separate from it, but there's an impact that happens for all of us. So especially those in healthcare, and this is why it was part of the reason I wanted to ask, is because so many people in healthcare have to keep their head in the game. And I want those listening in their, whether you're in the position or your family member or loved one, friend, whatever, we have to keep asking, are they okay? Because after we get through this push with all these people passing, there's going to be a very significant grief that happens for the witnesses of all of this too. So kind of took it off the rails there, but it just occurred to me that this is a good opportunity to say, this isn't just about, can, Kaela see spirits, or can Vicky see spirits, or can your kids see spirits, or feel them. It's about recognizing that we are interconnected in ways. I don't believe we're all one. No, we contribute to a whole, but sorry, we're not all one. Whoever's teaching that can just let that go. But as a little aside there, but that experience of being in the ED, because I remember there were a couple times you would text me that something was going on, and I would energetically get in there and just hose you off, because I was like, oh no, she's not taking this home with her, because that is a very real phenomenon that you can.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That one of the cases that I had mentioned in passing, like when someone was young, there was one specific patient that like I took the whole weekend, and it wasn't until like that following Monday that I'm like, I have to like cut all the ties and be like, oh, that shit was heavy, because it was one of those cases that it just stayed with me. Yeah. And because it happened right at the beginning of my shift, so of course I had to work the whole shift, and the family was there the whole shift, so that was, it didn't happen to me, but it felt like it happened to me, because that's a part of being like empathic, empathetic. Mm-hmm. Is like it feels like it's my stuff, right? So it felt like it was my child, and I had to go that whole shift and then that whole weekend, and I don't want to sound like poor me, I had to take all that stuff on, but like it can be very one of those situations where I would need to be hosed off. I can't find my words, because it was just so much, because I just absorb it all.
Yeah, and I think that's true of a lot of people who are in the caretaking professions. There tends to be a ribbon that runs through of wanting to help and not realizing that they may be taking on the pain of others. Like I was with Justin, my buddy trainer, this morning, and he said, my heart breaks for a person. And I actually slapped him and said, don't say that, because you take that into your physical self. You can feel for someone. You can absolutely acknowledge that, wow, I don't want them to hurt that much. I am going to feel love for them, whether you know them personally or not. But when we take that on and we say, my heart breaks for them, or anything like that, you actually take that into your system, and your heart hears it. Like your system listens to it. And there are a lot of times when I'm working with someone that I can just see all that debris stuck to them. And I'm like, okay, so hosing off, what that means is I will actually, because I have Kaela's permission, I don't look when I'm not invited. But if she's like, oh, I had a day or whatever, I'm like, okay, you're getting hosed off. Just like when you were little, I'd say bath now, and I go in and I just literally, I like a squeegee action, because it seems like it's a little bit more effective. And I just go in and I'm like, anything that's not hers has to go, because you still have to work with your own emotion or what that brought up for you, but we don't have to take on everybody's stuff. And there's one of the things that I wish more people felt was what it feels like to be on the other side, or could feel, and that joy that comes from someone after they've crossed, and like when you were saying, I'm out, and there's like this playfulness, there's this is so cool kind of thing. And I've had people say to me, you just don't care. And I'm like, no, I can feel their joy. I might not have the words to convey what that is, but because I can feel it, it sometimes gives me that giddiness that might seem like I'm for everybody croaking and it doesn't matter, that they passed. I wish everybody could delve into themselves a little bit and feel that. So, but it can be challenging, especially if you're a kid and you don't know what you're seeing or you don't know what you're feeling. I think it's important for people to hear you can order them out. Like you can say, get out. Like when you had that guy in your apartment on Jason Street, the one that was messing with your dresser drawers and stuff. Do you remember him? No. It was a young guy who likely had passed near the tracks behind your apartment. And you were like, can you just tell him to knock it off? And I said, well, you can. He's there because of your energy. So, like, get out. Tell him to get out. And because he would open up your dresser drawers. But, remember the woman? All these apartments she ended up in, people, they just had leftover junk from the people living. But remember the woman who, on whatever street that was, Fenn Street, where she would turn the picture if she didn't like someone? Do you remember this?
No, but like there's so many interactions that I've had and so many apartments that I've had that so, I'm sure it's up here somewhere.
Yeah. Well, you had said to me this really cool, it sticks in my mind because it was when you felt empowered by knowing how to interact with the spirit world. And that's what I'd like people to hear, is it doesn't have to be this like they show on TV where their face is ripped off and stuff. Yeah. I do jump out of my skin a couple times a week.
It can be scary sometimes.
Yeah, it can, and it can be adrenaline producing, and it can be, I don't like when they pop in my car seat. I'm like, can you not jump in the car with me? I am operating a motor vehicle here. But
I'm glad they don't do that to me. Maybe they're listening every time I reiterate 1,000 times a week that I don't like jump scares. Don't jump out at me.
Well, I don't like them either, but they just don't seem to listen to me. I think they know that if after I get over the heart palpitation, I think it's funny. So, but this is also something I deal with every day. So, but the reason I remember it so clearly is because I remember as a mom taking a deep breath saying, okay, I still thought you were too young to live on your own, but I remember taking a deep breath saying, okay, she's got somebody looking out for her, because there was a picture or something that was on the wall and she would flip it upside down if she didn't like the person who was coming to visit you. And she would put it right side up if it was somebody that was okay. And you were so excited because you figured out you like a mystery anyway, but you figured out the communication, the message. And she was right about, some dude who had stopped by or whatever. And I remember thinking, okay, on one hand, it's not cool because if somebody's doing that, it's likely that they're caught between the realms. And on one hand, I was like, you have to release her. Like, you have to let her go. And from a mom's perspective, I was like, oh, she needs to live there. Like, she just needs to stay with Kaela and not. So this is what I mean by, like, when someone crosses and they don't go completely to the other side, and they're caught in the astral realm. It's a lower level of the astral realm. That's what a lot of people call ghosts. So when the Haunting in Connecticut and, those shows where it does get embellished, because would it sell? If it didn't. But it's possible to have those. And if you're working in healthcare, law enforcement, EMT, sometimes just visiting a hospital, you can get these energies that travel with you. So that's an example of one that I was grateful for, but also felt a certain duty to cross her. I didn't until after you moved out, and then I did. But so is there anything that we haven't talked about regarding all of this? Because again, it occurred to me that we haven't really, it just was part of our world and not necessarily dialogue. Was there anything that you still have questions about, or you think others might benefit from knowing?
I got tons of questions. I want to know it all. I'll be like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Something about this just does not make sense.
No, we'll get used to that.
I don't know. Fill in the silence.
Yeah. Dead silence in it. Dead silence. In a podcast about people who croaked. About, I guess, the management of it. Like, do you know that you can absolutely, you have within your right as a human, as a being of this wiring, to say, no, I want no contact with the other side?
Yeah. I didn't at first. I thought that it just was what it was. Because, like I said in the beginning, I think I've been picking it up maybe all of my life. Yeah. So I kind of just rolled with it and thought that I was kind of a strange kid. Whatever. I had an imagination. As I've gotten older, it's gotten a lot more difficult. I wouldn't necessarily say for me to manage, because I think I have a pretty good control over it. But it's my willingness to let it in. I think that's a lot harder for me as I get older. But it definitely gave me a lot more confidence, like in that adolescent range of, you say it was Fen Street. I think it was actually the guy in the closet where you told me that I had to get rid of him myself. That when you told me that I could just tell him to go away. Maybe it was Jason Street, whatever one it was.
Well, I know I told you that with definitely with the closet guy, but probably had to remind you.
Yeah, that gave me a lot more confidence, and I still hold on to that to this day. And it's like, no, I don't have to listen to you. I will if it's something that, like, I definitely need to, like, if it's my message.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But it brings me a lot of comfort knowing that I can't just be like, no, I can't process this right now, because sometimes it can be too much, like we've already said. So I just turn the radio off.
Yeah. So yeah, pull in. Sometimes I imagine like those antennas that you hit a button and they go up on the car. And,
that's what I was picturing. That's funny. Yeah. You just pull it back in.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, no, I'll not be picking up any signals today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. No. Mute.
Yeah.
Turn my hearing aids off. Take them off so I don't hear anything, and then just energetic hearing aids as well. They're all off today. I don't want to hear it.
That is important. So for those listening, when you're helping your kiddo or yourself, because there are a lot of people through this expansion that we're going through universally and energetically, and people spending more time with themselves because of the pandemic and everything, that abilities are showing up that were turned down or off in childhood. Especially if you're in your early 40s, there's a lot happening for those entering that place where it's starting to be like, oh, I remember doing this as a kid. You can absolutely say, no, I have to deal with human stuff today. Pound it. Like, those on the other side don't take it personally. If it's someone that's caught in the astral realm, that can be a little bit more challenging because they need the energy in order to manifest, in order to be in the limbo state they're in. But you absolutely have a say of just get out. I don't have the capability right now, or I just don't want to. Like, sometimes I just want to watch a show on TV. I do not want to have a dialogue about what you did today and who you saw. I don't really care. I care about the person, and for some reason, gas stations tend to have a lot of energies with them. So I'll be pumping gas and I'm like, don't care. And I'm not going to talk to myself out loud here. Thank you very much. But having that, I'm glad to hear that it gives you a sense of strength, because I know, like, when I've talked to Kenzie about this too, and said, my granddaughter, I've said to her, just stand up to them. Like, just tell them to beat feet. Like, you're tired. Because typically it is 2-3 in the morning when you're getting those messages, because that's when we're furthest from the sun. And it creates a bigger activity thing. But I wanted people to hear that this can be quote unquote normal part of life, and you can still be a functioning adult in the world and participating and even being, frontline energy work, and then literal healthcare worker, and have this be a comfort for those who are crossing, that the passing process in and of itself, people tend to find difficult. And I truly believe that's a fear of what's coming next or what's on the other side. And that's why it gets dragged out sometimes. So if we have more of these conversations and we let people know that this is actually a pretty cool thing for the one crossing, I don't know, maybe we'll lighten up about ourselves too. And, maybe. But I wanted to, because the energy is so heightened right now. Holidays, New Year, pandemic, people passing, Age of Aquarius that we just entered, the conjunction, solar. It's happening on every freaking level. So what would you, as we wrap this up, what would you...
I do have a question, but you can cut it. But ask your question.
Oh, no, we can go there.
Because I don't know if it's exactly related to spiritual realm, but you mentioned that you didn't say frustrated, but I know it's frustration because I talked to you, with people who are finishing their contracts or coming to the end of their contracts, but are, my words, being stupid, with the pandemic going on. Because some people are just going to get it naturally because they're predisposed, but some people are just being kind of dumb. I'm curious if that frustration is justified, but I also wonder if that frustration also kind of ties to dad, because I feel it's the same, not the same type of situation, because this pandemic level, he was just dad. But he kind of was the same, if you think about it, because you could say his contract was coming to an end. Yeah. It is the way it was supposed to be, if you will, or the way he chose it to be. But at the same time, it was so preventable on so many different levels, and he just didn't do anything. Yeah. So his contract came to an end. Do you feel like that's the same, not the same, but is similar to that kind of feeling? Do you know what I mean?
For those who are crossing, or for those who are being irresponsible?
I guess kind of both, because you don't have to, but there is that, I keep hearing expectation and have to, but that's not what I want to say, but that expectation, for lack of a better word, of finishing a contract and just respecting that is their path, but also being kind of irresponsible, which I personally think that he was. So well, I guess that's where I'm kind of trying to tie it together without being dude.
Yeah, there is a component of that. And when I say someone finishing their contract, to be clear, there's more than one date. There's not a hard and fast, listen, gonna pass on August 20th, 2015, and that's when you're out. Right. There are other avenues. So yes, he actually took one of them. If you remember, he crashed when he had his carotid artery surgery, and they had to bring him back.
I do remember that.
So that was 2012.
Because you picked up on him in the lobby. Yes. I do remember that.
Yeah. Well, I knew that before he went in, but hoped I was wrong. But then when it happened, I was like...
Didn't he code again in October when he had his bypass too?
The first bypass?
Yes, not the one where the last time he was in the ICU.
People are like, Jesus, how many bypasses did this guy have? Two, by the way. Total aortic bypass, by the way, bifemoral. Twice. Yeah, it was a fun 5 years. He had a reaction to medicine the second time. The first time he actually coded. So that was in effect one of his exits. Okay, one of his options to take. And he did choose to come back. He did choose to do a U-turn. I don't know if my ordering him back in his body had anything to do with it, but he did choose to do a U-turn, come back, do some work that he really needed to do that he wasn't doing beforehand. Giving credit to Howard, we do tend to say you lazy bum, but he did do some amazing work in 3 years' time for him. So then it could have been in the way that it ended up being, and the stuff that he went through again medically, could a lot of that have been prevented? No. Could it have been postponed a bit? Yes. So there's some wiggle room in it, because obviously we have to take responsibility for what we eat, medicines we take or don't take. But inevitably, his contract would have completed in his 50th year. So at some point. So yes, there's irresponsibility to it, but there's also an honoring of that we can do and still be pissed about it, still be sad about it and everything. And I remembered actually probably 8-9 months after he passed, I was walking. Oh, Tank, you have to tell us the story.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I was walking Tank, who was our dog, the cutest pit bull you've ever seen in your life, and I remembered your father saying at one point that he was always going to retire at 50. And I'm like, and he used to say that when he was 30. And I'm like, he knew on some level.
You knew on some
level.
Well,
I knew 3 years before he actually.
No, you knew like a good decade beforehand. Because I think we talked about it in the empathy podcast, but in the cereal aisle at Price Right, randomly one day, you were like, your father's going to die young. And I remember exactly what I was wearing. I was like, what?
Yeah, for those listening, install a filter for your children. Sometimes my filter didn't work. Sometimes
I never let go of that. I still remember it. And then when it happened, I was like, holy shit.
Well, it goes to my track record. I do have a good track record. If I, like you said about the people in the emergency room and stuff, I can feel when someone's passing long before they pass, and it's not my favorite skill, but it does help me get ready. So Tank and your father. So Tank, for those listening, passed shortly after. No, 2 years. 2 years. 1 year. I can't remember, people. It was a rough few years.
1 year.
After Howard passed. So he was only 4. So he had significant seizure activity issues. He actually came into our life because of Kaela. And, the story where your kid gets a dog or a cat and they can't keep it and you end up with it. Best gift, no doubt, of an animal ever. Because he did help Howard to grow and to expand and all of that. And then animals, much like people, have contracts. And when they're complete with their contract, they just don't begrudging. They're just like, they're even more of a peace out. They're like, this is the best thing ever. I gotta go. So what's your memory?
Probably a week or so before Dad passed. Maybe a little more. He was still in the ICU. I had gone home. It was the only night I spent at home. I'm pretty sure I stayed in the ICU that entire time. But one night, I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It was like I hit a brick wall. So Sarah had to bring me home. I remember it was like 10 o'clock at night. And then she went back to be with you. So I was by myself at the house. And, maybe I spent 2 nights, because I think Donna was with me that night. Okay. So the following night, I spent 2 nights.
Shout out to the Howard's harem who got me through that time.
Regardless of what night it was, I was home alone. And I was up in my bedroom, and I heard as clear and as loud as day Dad's voice. Like earlier, I said I heard it loud and clear. It wasn't any voice I knew my father's voice. Mm-hmm. He yelled, "Tank," as if Tank was getting into something that he shouldn't have been. And it was one of those, "Tank!" And it scared the bejesus out of me, because I was home alone, and it was my dad's voice, who I knew was at Bay State. I thought I was going nuts.
He was on some good drugs, so he was probably traveling.
Right. I was like, this is it. I'm going crazy. I've had my psychotic breakdown. I can't take any more stress. But then you texted me. I texted you immediately and was like, I just heard Dad's voice. I'm freaking out a little bit. But you the next morning said that Dad told you that around that same time, he woke up yelling at Tank around the very same time that I heard him. And he scared the bejesus out of me. Just not do that anymore. Because he was loud, like it was in my ear. Tank! And I even like went down around the corner, even though I knew he wasn't there. I was like, hello? But it's just so weird that like you said that at the same time that he was doing that, I heard it an hour away. Yeah. Inside our house.
So this is the ability of spirit to travel. And when someone is passing, even though he was coherent, how on the level of morphine he was on, I don't know. But even though he was coherent, when we're asleep, we're in that same astral space as when you cross. So you're able to travel to other people and visit. So especially those who are in comas or in under anesthesia. People travel a lot under anesthesia. It's so fun. Because
that's why I'm afraid to go under anesthesia.
Yeah,
I just start flying.
It's the closest, truly. It's the closest experience to the natural crossing process and leaving your body that we have that's man-made. That's why I'm a big proponent of, death with dignity, because it mimics that releasing the body. And I have yet to have a soul come through when I either in communication or doing a session who didn't really like the morphine ride, because it's very true to our soul. We know it. But that ability, well, remember when he passed at 5 something in the morning, 22. And Kenzie,
I always wake up at that time. Yeah. Like almost every morning. If it's not earlier, because Dorito likes to wake me up.
Her cat.
I always wake up at 5:22. Yeah. Every morning.
So Dorito's a cat. That's not what she's named her child. Even though I love them, that would be a good tribute to me. But she was staying at her other grandmother's house, and at that exact time, the cat at their house, or 5:26 it was, the cat at their house started going bonkers and woke Kenzie up.
Oh, Kenzie.
Yeah. And so
I was not at my grandmother's. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, let's leave that out of this podcast. But there's some family things we don't talk about on public. So, but that's what happened, right? It happens when someone crosses. Their soul then goes and says all the goodbyes. He had squished us already, and he was going to say goodbye to all the people. So
I swear, he is who told me to take a nap that morning. Because I stayed up that whole night with you. Yeah. And then 20 minutes beforehand, I'm like, I really need to take a nap. Yeah. And I wasn't even tired, but I was like, no, a nap sounds good right now. Yeah. And I just passed out on the couch, and then he woke me up like 20 minutes later. I'm like, excuse me.
Yeah. Because it happens the way it's meant to happen. A lot of the times.
Absolutely. I think I wouldn't have been able to emotionally handle it.
Yeah, it would. Yeah,
and would have been better asleep.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty. Well, you know how well he snored. So, but that's what happens. Like, someone will go potty and come back, and the person is crossed. And it's always in the way it's meant to be, with the exception of suicide. And I just heard of someone this morning, and my heart just for his wife, that it's still a choice. They're still okay. They're still received in love and support and everything. And yeah, it's hard. So my question to you was going to be, if you could give some advice to those who maybe aren't in the place, we make it sound so easy to handle, like if they're not in that space, like how do they take care of themselves during this, like awareness that they might be picking up on others?
That's hard to answer, because I want to go back to that empathy video where I was like, well, just don't. But I also think that I come from a level of bias too, having that I had that whole lifetime of experience. And then, like, you've always told me that to just not shut it down, but just be adamant.
Put the close sign up.
Yeah. I do that a lot, admittedly.
Good.
So,
good.
Like the last 5 years, I've been like, sometimes stuff like goes through. More so at the hospital, I'd put my guards down a little more because we've already talked about that. But like when I'm home, I'm off. I don't want to hear it because Dad hangs out quite a bit.
You were his favorite. I mean, let's face it.
I know I'm making cookies and lasagna, but I'm off. I don't want to hear it right now. And I do that a lot just because that helps me process emotionally and mentally. So I don't want to say, like, shut it down or block it or anything, but just, I don't know, maybe remind yourself that you don't have to, you're not obligated to listen to them.
Thank you. That was what I was going to say.
So if you need to, like you were already saying earlier, if you need to say, maybe tomorrow, you can. Or maybe never. You can. Yeah. It's your choice. Yeah. So I think that's the only advice I would have is just try not to feel, because I know sometimes you just feel how you feel. But don't feel like just because they are talking to you that you have to be the only one that's listening.
Yeah. Thank you. Because that was going to be something that I mentioned in that they're communicating with us because they can. Yeah. Because it's fun. Because they have no limitation of energy or spirit. There is no obligation, and you're not stunting them. You don't have an ego when you cross, so no one on the other side is going to feel dissed that you didn't talk to them. Nor do they get mad at you if you don't, or you get rid of their favorite piece of furniture. They don't care about it. They're doing their own process. The fact that we can hear them is wonderful, or see them or feel the bed go down, that they're hanging out with you, that kind of thing.
That better not ever happen. When I saw that on A Haunting in Connecticut, because we used to watch those a lot. We laugh at those, but I remember Dad watched those a lot.
Anyway, I could screw you up and have, I used to say to you all the time, I got to give the therapist something to do later on.
But there was a scene in The Haunting in Connecticut, the dramatized one, where, like, one of those spirits or demons or whatever was, like, pulling down the blankets or whatever, and I saw that. I went, that better never happen to me. You're getting kicked in the face if that happens to me.
You're getting kicked in your non-physical face. Not from demonic, that's a whole different story of people stop believing that that's true. But it can be. You can feel that. So it's important to know that we have the ability to order them out. And if you're a parent of a child who's experiencing this, order them out in front of the person. Like, my bedroom is actually off limits. I set a force field around my bedroom because you got me the rest of the time. I want to sleep. Like, I love my sleep. I want to be in that space where my soul is doing whatever it's doing when it's traveling, but I'm not on duty. You can have me during my waking hours, but you can't have me then. You can absolutely order that the bedroom is off limits. So if you're a parent, teach your kids that. And sometimes a spray bottle works for the younger ones. You fill it and it's like ghost go away or spirit spray, I would rather you say, because ghost, again, is someone that's, disincarnated body kind of thing, energy. So disembodied spirit, not disincarnated. Okay. Forgetting my own vocabulary here. So thank you very much. I think this is the longest episode, but people will like it, and they can listen in chunks. Hopefully, this helps just take some of the drama out of it. I'd like to do that too, and just say, as we raise in frequency, we get closer to this astral realm. So likely that even though I don't feel like they need to communicate with us, we may experience the lights flickering or the TV going off, or
they're here.
There. I actually just saw that for the first time.
Oh my God, that movie came out decades decades ago.
I know.
It's such a classic.
Yeah, Mike was upset. Nothing scared me. I'm like, yeah, and he's like, forget it, because he thought it was going to scare me so bad. I'm like, no, been there, dealt with this firsthand. This does not scare me.
Right.
So you're going to have to up the ante on that one. Have to be some other kind of show. So thank you once again for joining us, for being part of this and helping to demystify some of this intuitive ability, and for being willing to help others, and join on this crazy ride I've got going here. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So that's another episode of Intuition Your First Sense, and I will see you on the next one. Take care of you. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you're interested in Wisdom Wednesday, feel free to go to the website vickybaird.com and check under booking, and you'll find the information there to sign up for the subscription. I am so grateful that you listened to this episode and that you're participating, and I hope you have more of an understanding of how values and our intentions can lead to completing some goals, which then allows us to feel fulfilled. I wish you all the best and be well.